Hello, today I'm joined by Dr. Rebecca Robinson, who is a sport and exercise medicine consultant. Rebecca, thank you for joining. How are you doing?
Thank you very much for inviting me. Doing good. Looking forward to chatting, Andy.
Yeah, likewise. So I've seen you speak a few times, and our paths have crossed a little bit. But I'm looking forward to learning more about you. Everyone speaks very highly of you, which is really nice. So I'm looking forward to hearing more about your journey and how you got to where you did.
Thank you. No pressure. But yeah, it'll be good. It's always good to kind of go through um, what I've done. Sometimes I find that quite helpful, trying to work out where I've been, what I've done. It's all part of a journey, isn't it?
I think it is. I think it's like in terms of reflection is something which has become so important to me. And it's like I've got a coach who I work with, and quite often he will say to me, how often have you looked at what you've done over it might be the last 18 months. I've been working with him for like over 3 years now. But I think it is really important to reflect and think, God, look at what you've done. Like it's easy to go onto LinkedIn and people put on what they've done and things, which is quite interesting. But to actually stop, like how often do you do that where you do literally reflect on what you've done?
That's a good question. We actually have to do it as part of our mandatory appraisal. So there's this annual appraisal system, and it's quite unusual for sports medics because we're not always entirely in the NHS. That's basically because there aren't enough, I think, full-time jobs in the NHS in sports medicine. But if you work in the NHS as a doctor, you have this appraisal within the NHS. And if you work as a sports medicine doctor, you might have it inside the NHS. You might have it done independently by the Faculty of Sports Medicine, but you have to do it. And at the time, you're collating all this data and you're thinking, oh gosh, I've got to put all this down. But when you come to talk it through with your appraiser, it's actually a really healthy process. And I guess I also do it when I'm trying to get something done, because there are areas in exercise medicine that I'm really keen on that we'll probably come to, but that sometimes means going back to the drawing board, applying for grants, getting your CV together. And sometimes I think, oh, I haven't got this, that, or the other done. I think that quite a lot. To get a bit frustrated. But when you go back through what you've actually managed to do along the way, it's got value. So it's quite nice to reflect like that. I do think you're right. It's really important.
So what does that appraisal look like then?
Well, it's all the usual tick boxes. We have a lot, which would be good for people to know, because in medicine, you've got to make sure that everyone's done all the accreditations and courses. And some of those kind of health and safety related or being up to date, you have to do every year. And if you work for more than one organization, sometimes you end up doing them in duplicate. But you have to get feedback from colleagues and feedback from patients. You have to do the reflection that I've mentioned. Yeah, you have to put all of that together basically in an online portfolio every year. So it's quite a process, really. Yeah.
So how do you go about getting feedback from colleagues and patients?
You can send sort of an email that goes anonymously, which is, I think, I think it would be kind of nicer to have that as a conversation, but I don't know. I think for like ease, but potentially biased in some ways, it's like sent as an anonymized message. But then everyone's got busy lives, so I'll get those kind of emails from colleagues and I'll fill them in on a little thing online. But you think it's nicer to sit down and actually get that feedback. So there are a couple of meetings where you need to get your line manager. And of course, in sports, if you've got more than one part-time job, you can end up with several line managers. So sitting down and having that conversation is part of the process. And in sports, actually, that is a formal part of the annual process. So we'll have a meeting with the team and we'll talk about how things have gone well or badly, and audit some of the things that we've done, some of the measurable outcomes. So those are kind of more organic, I guess. Yeah, so there's lots of different sides to it, and it's a bit the same with patients. It usually send like an anonymized form with lots of domains in, and these forms are all like designed to capture all the things that we need to be improving on, I guess, through our whole careers too.
Yeah, sure. It's really interesting, isn't it? And but is it for the purpose of that then is I guess not for you really to is it for you to reflect like what is the ultimate aim and who's like running that process?
Yeah, I mean, basically under it all for medics, it's a general medical council. They're the ones who are like have you tick it off every year, and every 5 years you have to be what's called revalidated. So it's almost kind of refresh and make sure that you're totally up to date with the systems. Within that, for sports medicine, it's often the Faculty of Sport and Exercise Medicine. And if you're working within the NHS, it kind of bolts onto their processes too. It does sometimes feel like a bit of a negative process because you've got to tick all the boxes. Well, you've had no complaints then, no problems, sort of thing. But which is all very, very important. But I think there is enough built into it to make it a little bit of a edifying building up process.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think it's really interesting to do that, and because it is easy to just be like, we're in nearly the end of May now, and
Mm-hmm.
it's like, where does time go? And you think
Oh,
actually, just you're on that conveyor belt, and it feels
mm-hmm.
more like that than ever for me
Mm,
with what I do and the people that I speak with. It seems to be. I mean,
really. Yeah.
consultants, you guys are chocker anyway because you're normally working in multiple places.
Mm.
So, like, is that something that you've got that formal process that you've got to do, but is it
Mhm.
something that you do for your own balance and well-being?
Yeah, I think so. I think I always want to write a diary and I jot things down sometimes. I tell my patients to journal and then I never quite get around to it. I really should, because when you look back, your thoughts and processes are never quite the same as how you dealt with something in the moment. So yeah, maybe if I put that on record, maybe I need to do that. But yeah, life gets busy and you're replying to emails instead of journaling something. But yeah, I think it is important to keep track. I guess I kind of do a lot of reflection because we'll probably come to it, but there's aspects of the job that are different in what I deliver now to what I expected I would be focusing on. But I also have the expectations are kept the same. So there is quite a lot of reflection and yeah, those around me probably hear it on repeat a little bit of, what am I trying to get to? What am I doing? And maybe I do too much of that rather than focusing some of the other aspects. But I think it's a healthy process. I think we all of us spending that time working out what we enjoy, but also enjoying the moment as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think it is because we've pretty much fallen into the kind of the 4 5 day working week, maybe
Mm,
6 days, maybe longer if you're particularly in sports that you're doing that. And it's you sometimes think, well, is that healthy that you're at 9 to 5? Like these are all quite old-fashioned constraints of things, and it's changing a little bit. But I'm actively trying to put in a day, which is feels an absolute luxury at the moment of like reflection or being able to look at new ideas, where to take the business.
mm.
And but that I'll probably feel a bit guilty for doing something like that. Whereas I think it's important actually to do your best work.
It's a very interesting reflection. We just had a bank holiday and that day was great because I sent the odd couple of emails. My brain suddenly could just get into a different gear of some things that I was trying to get to. Yesterday was a good day, but everything woke up again. And instead of being able to think in a sort of processed way, it's more a case of firefighting. Like you say, 9 to 5, I did actually smile then because there is a little quote in a medical book about careers that doctors might take. And I just remember the one for sports meds. It says, your athlete will find you, because the demands in sport, whatever level you are, but I guess especially in pro sport, are you need to fix this issue now because there's impending competitions. But also on the flip side, I have patients who are seriously ill and they've got the pressures of an upcoming surgery and we've got to get them fitter for it. So you've kind of working this sort of 9 to 5 and sort of like 7 till 7 process where people know they can contact you online as well. So I think for this generation, trying to develop those filters, it's almost having to let everything in and then kind of build them up after that. It's a tricky one because in the old days, a doctor would be in their office, or even when I worked in hospital medicine, you've got your bleep when you're on call, and that never stops bleeping until you finish your shift. But when it does, you hand it back. Whereas now, my phone is very much the equivalent of that little bleep, and it never really goes off. So
Yeah, well, attention. I see that quote. Attention is the new gold, and it's like for us as a company that are in sales,
yeah.
marketing, educate, whatever you want to say, is everyone is constantly fighting to get. We want to get your attention, Rebecca, and to come and do this, do that,
Mm,
and but other people will be doing the same for you as well. And it's like, well,
mm,
so then it's like emails. It's like, right, well, I turn my emails off in the evening now. Brilliant, it's
mm.
been really helpful. But then WhatsApp's there, and it's like 1,200 messages, and
Yeah.
it's like it like you say that your athlete will find you. People
Mm-hmm.
find that way of getting attention.
Yeah, it's a funny balance because it's very satisfying being able to jump on to an issue and try and resolve it. And I think that's one of the hooks for us when we do sports medicine, because you are going to get contacts out of hours and it might just be you can solve things. And unfortunately, because it's unfortunately for the NHS, because of the way the systems are funded, that's so much easier in sports where the athletes are funded, for example. You can get things done incredibly quickly. But sometimes you can't actually speed things up in terms of the physiological processes. Sometimes a little bit of time, either reflecting, either healing, can be very beneficial. But on the other side, if someone's worried about an issue and you need to kind of put a process in place, it is very satisfying to be able to get onto that immediately. I think that's one of the areas in sports that I would just love to copy and paste to the NHS. Of course, it works in some areas, but in some there are kind of quite significant wait times from when someone first develops an issue to being able to get the attention that even just helps them to put next steps in place. And for me, I guess these jobs have made me more impatient for those patients.
Yeah, like, so where do you see the future of this? We were chatting briefly before, and that we're working with more and more private institutions that are offering consultant-led services, which is really exciting. But also, where does that leave the NHS? Like, well, where do you see the future of an SEM consultant?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's a tricky question. I think there always will be good jobs in sports exercise medicine, whatever someone wants to do, and people's drivers are different because you can deliver excellent musculoskeletal care in exercise medicine, which is a whole kind of breadth of holistic and kind of physiological medicine, and also care in different aspects of illness related to sport. So there'll always be those jobs in the private sector in sport. I hope the NHS develops it further because the NHS is actually a great employer. There are some good employers out there in the private sector too, but the NHS can do a lot of good things. It's tricky climate at the moment. It has been for a number of years in terms of investing in that. And I guess we're both talking in the north of England. In the south, there is a healthier number of sports exercise medicine posts in the NHS. There aren't double negative that there are not none in the north. There's about one in each of the major cities, in Sheffield and Manchester. I'm not even sure about Leeds right now, but I think that we really could develop those services because we can parallel like what the doctors are doing in different departments. So for example, if you're working in an elderly care ward on frailty, you can have an impact. If you're working in inpatient wards, say patients in oncology, you can have an impact in terms of their health and sustaining fitness during cancer treatment. Cardiac rehab's been there for a long time, and you don't always need a doctor, but we have an increasing population with complex needs and long-term conditions. It's really a heavy burden, and I do think our specialty, not all of us, but those of us that like the very medical part of it, so the hospital medicine background, we can help to deliver in that area. And on the other side, we have overly busy departments like A&E, where a sports medic can be in there seeing the stress fractures that come in and the ankle rolls and the different musculoskeletal issues and triage those really effectively. Whereas at the moment, they kind of pile into the busy departments workload. So I think there are lots of streams, but how to get there? I know a lot of my senior colleagues have been building it for years, and it's a tricky area because things need funding and things need to be commissioned. So.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I am such an advocate of the NHS, and I've had brilliant experiences, even recently with things on it. When it works well, it's really good. And it's like, how do you do it? It's just so big, isn't it? Like, it's so massive. You've got so many people in there, and it is. It's like, I don't know what the future is for it. And I think that feels like that's a question that a lot of people are asking at the moment.
Yeah, and it might be that we need to look outside healthcare and we need to look at the people who understand tech and understand big businesses in terms of how to modernize. It also, there is scope, we mentioned just briefly before this call about like there are lots of private providers, and in some cases, even the ones, there's a couple in Manchester, there's Spire Healthcare, there's HCA. Sometimes they'll provide some services to the NHS, and actually sometimes that happens the other way around too. So sometimes those partnerships, if someone's got a specific expertise, can work by commissioning as well. So sometimes a hybrid model, changing things around, can help to deliver as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting one with the private hospitals. And again, from my experience, and when we're engaging with these, whether it's supply chain or people that are doing it, like for example, if we're working with in private healthcare, pure sports medicine, I can speak to the FD, the MD if needed, the clinical director. You can just do that and you get a decision pretty quick. Whereas when you're going into, say, Spire or some of these private hospitals, you're going into a lot of bureaucracy again, and it doesn't feel quite as dynamic as like you're working doing some stuff with Carter and George. You speak to Reese, Chris. You get answers quickly, and it can be quite dynamic. So, like, what's your experience within? And I'm actually going to have a conversation with some of the guys at Circle in a couple of weeks, which I'm really looking forward to, and trying to understand how they offer what they perceive as best practice, because there's definitely a part to play. But where do you see the difference between, say, NHS, private healthcare, as in the private hospital groups, and then the up and coming independently owned private clinics?
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. In a lot of ways, it's a privilege to be able to work in different settings. Wasn't what I set out to do, because a lot of what I want to do is based on the NHS. And that was my understanding when I went into this specialty. I guess if I move further south, that might be something's an option. But then I look at the north and think, we need these resources as well. So I think it's very interesting. And it depends on the size of the business, really. So I respect a lot what a lot of these businesses have done and have developed. And I think the NHS has taken some steps to put sports exercise medicine within it's something that's really hard to commission, hard to understand, hard to kind of look at the return on investment from some aspects, because it's not something that has medications or surgeries routinely around it. There's a lot of other aspects too. There are some of those, but different aspects to it too. So I think the fact that some of the larger private organisations have actually developed that. So Spire have a sort of offshoot called the All Team in Manchester, and that has now formally developed its sports medicine. HCA have got a big centre in London. That's this national centre, which is a great collaboration, because that is University College Hospitals London in the NHS. It's also the UK Sports Institute, and it's also HCA. They all kind of work together. So I don't know the ins and outs. It's probably plenty of these organisations aren't perfect, but that's one example of sort of a collaborative approach to build something bigger. And then, yeah, as you say, some of these practices, such as Carter and George, which was initially, as I understand, a physio business, working with sports medicine. But I think it's that recognition that the team model of having physiotherapists, other allied health professionals, sports exercise medicine, and access to radiology is what we often need in these cases. We get some quite complex cases where you need to be able to talk to all those different specialties and to bring a solution together. So I think they're all looking to different solutions, and just hopefully all of those businesses keep looking to each other as to how to evolve further, and listening to those in sports medicine when we've been a little way along that journey, what works, what doesn't. I think we've got to keep evolving in this specialty, and that again is a kind of luxury. It's a challenge because you can't sort of follow a well-trodden path, but there are those who've set it up in the pretty recent history who've built aspects of the path. So I think, yeah, there's a momentum in keeping on developing it, but it sometimes means you feel like you don't pause for breath.
Yeah, I think that it's like with anything, there's no right or wrong answers in a lot of these things. It's what you think is best at the time, and you're doing the best that you can. You think of an idea that works, it doesn't work. Okay, great. Some of it does, move on to it. So I think it is really exciting. And for my time working in this area, things have changed so dramatically since COVID, but also just other factors that are playing that part. So no, it is really exciting. So wasn't meaning to go down straight onto that, but that was some interesting topics. So yeah, so you mentioned you're based in the north of England. Like, where are you from originally?
Actually from the Lake District, and look back to being based in the Lake District currently, but via Newcastle, where I studied medicine and did my junior, well, now residency jobs, and then to Sheffield, which is where I actually did the specialisation in sports medicine. So yeah, so the Lakes I'm really lucky to be from the Lakes. Family are in the Lakes, and I think I would spend my whole life wanting to come back here. But it does mean that you also have to kind of have the like energy to move toward the cities to do some work, because there's just like larger healthcare systems, kind of, unfortunately, in some respects. But yeah, it's good to have a little bit of hybrid.
Yeah, whereabouts in the lakes are you?
Windermere, so pretty central Lake District. It's an interesting place. It's got a lot of challenges of its own in terms of healthcare provision, simply because of the geography of it. You have some mountains in the way of getting to urgent care centres. It's obviously got a lot of natural beauty and a lot of opportunities to be very active. And then it's actually got a lot of deprivation right out on the west coast, probably because it is so remote and rural. So it's a very contrasting, interesting place.
Yeah, I mean it is amazing. Like, having like the lakes is just so spectacular. Whenever I go there, it's we tend to go, like me and Gabby will go up there. So we went up for her birthday this year. We went to the Gilpin, which you probably know, one of that hotel there. And
Yeah.
it's but you do feel like, from that balance perspective, I feel like you kind of do switch off. Like, from your, bearing in mind it's your home and you live there, like, what do you still see it as a switch off place, or is it just home?
Oh yeah, very much. I don't really take it for granted. You can't. I mean, it doesn't. We just had an incredible run of sunshine for about 3 months, which is unheard of. And the lakes are looking pretty dry. But even as I speak, that the rain is coming down and it will fill those lakes up. But it is really beautiful. And it's wonderful because I run and I can just escape into the hills or escape into those sort of hard to find places. So it's very special like that. I think it's also a system. You kind of have to work it to live in it, even if depending what your work involves, but it relies on those networks. You have to kind of respect the environment. There's also networks of people who can work here, but it relies on a lot of interconnectedness to keep it alive, really. It has tourism as a big source of income, but to get things to work in the lakes, you do have to sort of literally go that extra mile, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So when you were, what prompted you to go into the line of sport, well, into medical to begin with?
I mean, to begin with, I'm not even quite sure. When you're kind of 18, you're having to make this big decision. I thought, oh, I'll give it a go, do medicine. I thought 5 years is a long time to do a degree. Gosh, I thought I'll never go back and do something like that again, which was a fairly blinkered perspective, I would say. You know, I'd say to anyone, take time, get a bit of different experience. But I loved acute medicine and hospital medicine a lot more than I thought I would. I was this kind of balance of absolutely terrified for the first few years for sure, and really addicted to that kind of whole environment, because it's just relentless pressure and life or death a lot of the time. There are elements of it that aren't, I guess, that healthy in terms of a system and how hard you work, but I guess it's a one way to learn. And I guess from an early point I was noticing that not everyone, because illness is a leveler and outcomes aren't always dependent on your fitness, but sometimes if someone had been more resilient, more robust before they got a certain illness, then they might do somewhat better. That's basically physiology underlying it. What does it take to become more resilient, or what can we do if someone gets some terrible hit out of the blue, whether it be a heart condition or cancer, for example? What can we do around them to make it more sustainable? Because we have these wonderful, amazing treatments and incredible acceleration in the treatments that we can offer, the medications we can offer, the surgical interventions. I've seen those changing even over very recent years. But trying to fill in what someone needs in terms of their health around that to get the best outcomes is not as well serviced. And that's where exercise medicine comes in, at all aspects. So sometimes I'll get somebody who's incredibly fit, who's been through a significant health event, and they really want to get back up there. But sometimes I'll see someone for whom being physically active isn't something that was within their lives. It might be within their job role, but also for some, exercise is still a luxury. And I think as a society, we don't actually recognize that as much as we should, that for a big section of the population, just kind of like keeping food on the table, keeping their families going is a lot to do. So trying to help some people in that zone get more active, more well while they're getting treatment is a big driver. So those are absolutely my drivers, and I believe that's what I would be able to focus my job on. Luckily I can focus some of it, but the actual, everyone kind of assumes the sport was the motivator because I do running, and I guess I didn't see that at all. Working within teams, the way that women's health in sport has come through just at a parallel time, there've definitely been areas that I found fascinating and continue to find it. So that was kind of like an unexpected side too. So there's a few facets to it, but that big driver was, how can we help people be back to them? Or this is a quote from a patient, really. How do you maintain being you when you're going through different treatments? And the physical aspects and the psychological ones that come with it as well are big drivers.
Yeah, it is interesting. I think you're definitely right. Whenever someone says sport and exercise medicine consultant, right, what team do you work with? Physio, even physio is like, just physio is so diverse, but automatically people, right, okay, yeah, so that's sports injuries, and they're still called sports injuries. And I think it is. I don't know whether that needs to be looked at some point as to what that is, because there is such an association with it. Like with some of the tech that we work with, it's like, all right, force plates, right? Okay, well, we don't work with athletes. And it's like, well, everyone has strength deficits, or everyone's got these different things. And that, I'm a big believer in how do we help make similar to what you're saying. I mean, I've got a sports science background, but really it's across the whole board of my mum. My mum went to Worth Team and saw John and the guys there, and she's in her 70s for different things, and it's really helpful for that. So, like, what is your perspective on that? Is that damaging? Like, well, not damaging, but you know what I mean in terms of the association of that sport element, that word.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's difficult. It's what's in a name, and we're going through changes with the Faculty of Sports Medicine and British Association of Sports and Exercise Medicine, hoping to come together and build something kind of bigger, and it's where how that name changes. I guess when that was formed, the elements, the sports side, the exercise medicine side, are bespoke within the title, but it does cover other things. So, for example, lifestyle medicine's kind of evolved in that period of time. You could put the two very closely together because there are so many elements that are cross-covered. So it's an interesting one because you don't want someone to feel excluded. Sometimes it's quite nice if you have someone who has been through a significant illness and you're saying, well, you're getting treated really like an athlete. If they can relate to elements of that, that can be helpful. But I think for people for whom being active in terms of sport or exercise is not normally part of their lives, trying to explain what you're doing is hard. And a lot of it, what I will work in, comes under rehabilitation medicine, and that's certainly the case for athletes if they've got long-term injuries. But rehab medicine is a brilliant specialty, more focused, I guess, a lot around neuro rehabilitation. There are huge crossovers which I think could be explored, but it is interesting how that term could be a barrier as well. And I think trying to explain in medicine in the States, it's called physical medicine and rehabilitation, PM&R. That's the name of the specialty that covers team sports medicine all the way to rehab medicine in general. And hesitate to say there are some cautions in terms of what we can learn from the States right now without getting political, but that is one area where perhaps that model of a more fluid transition from the sports right through to general rehab, because even when we're working in sports, a lot of the time we're working in complex conditions, sometimes complex medical issues that have arisen even in a young fit person. Certainly working on mental health is a big aspect of all sports. In women's health, those aspects around women's health specifically are often not related to sport. They impact the sport, but they're not the sport's not the cause in all cases. So it's a broad specialty at its best, I think.
Yeah, no, it is interesting, and it's because I don't know if you know Manoj Sivaj, who was at the so great guy, really dynamic, and I know he is looking at how do we work together. So he's on from the rehab medicine side, but it is so different. Like the vibe is just different. Like when I speak to, I think that cultural piece is to it actually that rehab medicine. Yeah, it is. I think the words do matter in these instances because you do have an association of what it is that you're doing. So yeah.
I agree. And Banner Sivan, who's a prof in rehab medicine, he's done so much to try and bring the specialties together. He's someone I'll ask for advice at times how we get that a bit further. We kind of had, I won't say a missed opportunity, but there was a time when there was a conference just recently in sport exercise medicine and in rehab medicine in the same building, and sometimes just trying to get people to join forces is tricky, and it's sometimes not for, I know he tries very, very hard to get that done, so it's not for want of trying, but just the opportunities sometimes aren't just quite right. But I think we can learn a lot from that specialty. And again, like we said about the NHS before, sometimes having the fresh resources of sports exercise medics in terms of their time and what we can deliver, for example, working within rehab units, why not? Of course, that happens in the military a lot. There are the rehab units where the doctors that work within the Ministry of Defence will often be working as it's a sports medicine role, delivering that rehabilitation alongside the rehab instructors and the physiotherapists. So there are different models in different sectors, and certainly a lot of brilliant doctors actually work in that domain.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. It's interesting to hear your passion, but your I suppose driver was more on the exercise side. So when you're seeing people now, then, so whether it's All Team or any of these places, then, so what would be a typical or common thing that you would see people about?
I'm going to throw it left field now. So we said talk about the exercise medicine and say things like bone health injuries. So, for example, I do work with quite a lot of musculoskeletal issues, and I guess the marathon season just having rolled by, I've seen quite a lot of people with bone stress injuries, and that they're interesting, those injuries, because that can be because someone's basically ramped up their training with a great goal in mind, but we can't always keep up with our body's turnover, that physiological turnover in bone, and sometimes even with the best training and nutrition, things like that will happen. They will also happen when people don't quite get the balance right. So if someone's fallen into what we call the relative energy deficiency, they're just not getting enough building blocks from enough fuel to help support the body, its bones, but also a lot of other hormones and processes that are really important within the body, and it will fail at some point. And these injuries can be quite tricky, even for excellent physios. You need a scan because sometimes the pains will flit about before they totally coalesce on an area, and that's because there's some issues in terms of swelling, in terms of the actual bone itself, and lack of repair within the bone. So we'll need to get a scan to work it out, and then we have a whole piece on how to rebuild that athlete. And this happens in the elite setting, and often at the worst times, often right on that cusp of competing. So my peak for seeing them this year was, quite mid-April, late March, April, through just to before the marathons. But yeah, how to repair those. And then sometimes we're working on the nutrition, sometimes it's the psychology. They're quite big areas once we open them up. So I guess that will be quite a typical case. Other joints injuries, everything from the fingers of climbers, to the ankles of football players, and all of those joints and bones can come under stress. So working somewhere like the Ortho team, for example, brilliant to be able to work with some excellent musculoskeletal radiologists, run those cases by them and say, well, this happened, this is how you treat the person, this is the story. And that's usually most instructive to the radiologist, because we can see issues on a scan, but it's interpreting them in context and what you do. And sometimes you need to talk to an orthopedic colleague as well. And then, gosh, I guess quite a number of different issues in terms of the under-recovered athlete. Is someone tired all the time? What's going on? Obviously, COVID threw up a long COVID, which was a really horrendous issue for people to deal with. But that really taught me to look holistically, because people were getting symptoms that were in no textbook. And you have to listen and try and understand. And that's sometimes you just got to level with the patient and say, all I can do is hear this, and we'll work together to try and take things forward a bit. But yeah, there's plenty in medical school where the lectures end going, yeah, when we don't know, all of us, we know, to reassure people, we do know a lot of things, a lot of treatments, but there are areas in medicine that just keep evolving, and we keep getting better and better treatments. But this one threw it open again, and we were getting symptoms that no one had ever heard of. So I guess that refreshes the need to go into any clinic any day with an open mind and just listen. So those are some of the cases on an average day.
Yeah, no, it's definitely diverse. So in terms of like listening to people and that, like those skills that you say, maybe not that they're non-clinical, but they're non-physical clinical skills.
Mm-hmm.
Like how do you hone those skills? How do you know what to say? How do you know what to do? Like how do you learn that?
Yeah, I mean, I think medical school can do a really good job at starting off. I felt totally overwhelmed in a lot of medical school, because you're getting all of these conditions and processes, but the one thing they kept calling back to was listening. Like, try and listen to the patient for 2 or 3 minutes before you jump in. And it's really hard to not do that, partly because you want to help, you immediately want to advocate and find a solution. But yeah, listening to the story can often give so many clues, and sometimes that's to a diagnosis, but also sometimes that's to why it happened or why it happened right now. So yeah, I think those are some of the tools around it, and trying to ask quite open questions, not the yes no answer ones, to try and get someone to open up. And I think one of the other things I really enjoyed, again, which I didn't expect to learn quite so much from, was motivational interviewing. And that's, trying to find out what the drivers or the barriers are to someone. In terms of someone, for example, who's a bit naive to exercise, they've never done it before, trying to find out why, what do you like, is really important. But also finding the barriers, because then sometimes people won't, especially in the context of a doctor-patient situation, which still, hopefully it's not as hierarchical, but it's still someone who's like in control somewhat of someone else's health in that moment. It's quite the power balance. Even if I go to see a doctor, the power balance is different, because you're kind of worried what might happen. It's hard to have it feel even. I think it's important, but I think acknowledging that it can be hard is also important. But yeah, trying to work out what those barriers might be, because someone might not say, actually, you're advising me to do this, but I think, yeah, I'm never going to do that. So I think trying to get some of those aspects out there, and it's what the person's comfortable to share. But it's quite a privilege to be able to understand someone on that level. And when you work in sports, I think one of the other reasons that's nice is you keep a very professional relationship with the athletes, but sometimes you're working with someone who's gone into their sport on a team for like 5, 6, 7 years, and they're moving through life at that time. Some of their motivations will change, some of their reasons for being there and what they're aspiring to. So it's a bit, in that way, it's a bit like, I guess, GPs in the olden days would build those longer term relationships, and understanding why X treatment might work for one person and not another is quite a valid way of practicing.
Yeah. So for that motivational interviewing, I don't know that much about it, but I'm really interested in it. Gabby, my fiance, she's a works in CBT and that mental health
Mm-hmm.
side. So we talk about it quite a lot. Like, is that something that you've gone through I'm now thinking I'm asking you a closed question here, but like, is that something you've actively done, or is it just something you've watched on podcasts or whatever?
I was really lucky because I was training at Sheffield, and Sheffield Hallam University, they're kind of one of the super centres of sports exercise medicine. And it's interesting because they're not always directly involved. They're the Hallam University site, so they're not Sheffield University, which is the one that's absolutely locked into the medical school, but they've done a lot of developing the physical activity courses. And it's quite a few years back now, but when I was a trainee, we were just given the opportunity to do the full course. I can't remember now how long it was, but it was a really well orchestrated course using kind of the behavior change specialists, the psychologists, and explaining that. And of course, one course is never enough, but it was good to kind of sow that seed and bring it into practice. And I did find at that time I was working in one population who really have a lot of multiple deprivations. Sheffield's a great city, it's right there in the peaks, but it's also got a lot of the history of the old steelworks and a lot of areas that are quite deprived. And it was really interesting going in there because I kind of got parachuted into a GP practice for part of that training. Even when you're not like a GP, you spend time in your sports med training in like A&E and orthopedics and GP, and just learning that for that population, nipping to the swimming pool is not for some people something they can just go and do in balance of their lives. So trying to listen to some of those barriers and trying to work something that's not just, and here's what you'll do, but actually what is something that they can start off themselves, and that still comes into play most weeks, I guess, especially I think with people with long-term conditions. What can you actually do when you've not got a team around you? What feels right and what can you sustain, even if it's not what is ideal? Because when you're prescribing exercise, it's all very well giving repetitions and sets even to someone that's new at it, but if it's not something that they can readily follow, it's not a case of they're not going to do it, it's a case of how and what the barriers are. Because I think we forget that, like, athletes in elite sports programs have about 20 people around them, and that's just the support staff to help them get there, turn up at the gym. I personally am much better if I'm running with a friend doing a training session. Don't do that enough, or going to the gym when there's someone there that can help me to get to what I need to do. That intrinsic motivation is something that, a lot of elite people have, but they've got the support systems around it. So expecting someone who's never been in that environment or had to be more active to get there on their own, some can, but I think it's needs more support. So it's a really long way of answering your question.
Yeah, no, I think it is. I think it is interesting with it, and it is. In terms of the sports teams, so where have you worked in sport?
So at the moment, I work with UK Sports Institute with GB Boxing. I've been there a very long time, really, relatively in sport. And I work with women's cricket at Lancs Cricket. Those are the main ones. And then I do some work with tennis in the summertime, in the grass court season. And then some of the other sports are a little bit more kind of as the opportunity arises. So I've usually got one or other ultra runner somewhere in the country doing something in an event.
So you must see a lot of hands then if you're boxing, cricket, tennis.
Yeah, we do seem to get a lot of hand and wrist injuries, but hopefully we're quite good at getting on top of them. In boxing, it tends to be something that we often get from overuse in training. In cricket, things can just happen quite suddenly.
So is that in Sheffield? You with Ian Gatt and the guys over there?
Yes, that's where GB is based, GB Boxing. And like we've seen the women's team come into it since just before I started there, and obviously they're kind of 50-50 in terms of the size of the team. And there's a huge turnover in that sport because most people will go professional after an Olympic cycle, whereas sports like athletics and cycling, people will quite often stay for more than one cycle.
Yeah, in terms of the mindsets that you see, it's like boxing. I always think boxing is like the toughest sport because you're on your own in the ring, then you're physically getting battered, most likely. So, what do you take away from like the athletes that you work with? Well, probably in particular, I mean, I think tennis has got a lot of comparisons or similarities to it as well, just in terms of that one-on-one duel. But like, what do you see as characteristics in these people?
They are fascinating population to work with. I think in boxing you certainly get people who come from all walks of life. Sometimes the boxing club has been a way out, and I think again we don't recognize that enough. And a lot of these athletes are incredibly intelligent, driven people who sometimes haven't had the opportunity, sometimes have. I guess we've ranged from people where we've got the sports lifestyle support around getting some of the basics of their education because they just didn't have the chance, to people who've been balancing getting to the Olympics with their master's degree successfully, as just happened in the recent Olympics. So I think they're a very driven population of athletes. they face all the same kind of like concerns in life and challenges as anyone else in a lot of respects. But I think there is often quite a lot of respect. Certainly the coaches, it's like a coach-led program, and I think you have to have a certain ability, not just to balance your training, which they train like 3 times a day, at least when they're in there in the GB setting, but also things like the nutrition. You know, you've got to be so on it because it is a weight limited sport. So in athletics, where I'm very hopeful we're moving toward like, let's just be your best at your strong, and the aesthetic of it isn't always, some athletes are lean, some athletes will not be quite as lean but will be fast and strong, and I think that's something that's evolved and that's really healthy and important. Whereas in boxing you're a bit stuck because you've got to cut it at an Olympic weight. So the doctors and nutritionists are in the background making sure that everyone's healthy, but having that discipline and sometimes the ability to focus that a bit, like I guess it's a bit like the sort of military discipline of just following what you have to do to get there, but that in itself doesn't undermine that they have their own very individual drive to do it. And I think, you know, with boxing potentially more than most sports, you have to get in the ring saying I'm going to win and believe that. Whereas in some of the sports that, I mean, I can't speak for all sports, but like not everyone has that exact mentality at all times in their performance. So it's a hard sport to do. It's very hard and demands huge amounts of fitness and commitment. And yeah, it's kind of a privilege to work with those athletes that go through that system.
Yeah, no, and I can imagine it would be. I mean, over the last few years, and particularly recently, there's been some high-profile cases where they've talked about weight cut and those sort of things and rehydration clauses. What's your view on just in general that? Because it's a fine balance between making a big fight and being healthy and safe.
Yeah, I think it's fortunate in GB boxing that everything's very simple. You keep the athletes healthy, and you know, I can say on record, I've seen none of that happen. If it had, I hope I would not be involved in that sport anymore. We have a excellent nutritionist who's also a dietitian he's worked in eating disorders before he started working in boxing and has really good experience. And he's someone who he works with Auntie Joshua and that kind of camp and has done for a lot of years, but he's worked within the sport for a long time, and we have quite a close working relationship in terms of any concerns. We just got to keep those athletes healthy. If, you know, especially with the women, you can tell, because if someone is growing, because often they're quite young athletes, and we're talking growing with, say, you know, in your 20s to 30s, you're still developing a lot of muscle mass, and often we see some of the best athletes internationally will actually be competing in their 30s, which is different to some other sports. So we tend to have probably an average is like early 20s but to 30s, and probably the Olympians are biased slightly more towards later 20s and 30s. It may be that you're just physically resilient and robust at that age, especially in the women. So for example, if we get a young woman in their early 20s who's missing a menstrual cycle, we start saying, well, hang on, what's happening here? Are we optimizing everything around nutrition? And if we do and it's still not there, it's quite a healthy and quick conversation with the team that athlete will go up a weight if they want to. Do you know? So I think it's very open. We encourage that open conversation from the athletes. But yeah, I think it's important. There are no shortcuts in sport, really, as far as I can see. And I guess that's one of the benefits in terms of the Olympic program. It's underpinned with a lot of governance. We've got UK Sports Institute. It's all funded by UK Sports. So there's still huge pressures to get medals, for example, for the whole sport, for the back room as well as the athletes. But it's not the same sort of cutthroat environment as it can be in the pro scene, where it's, you know, there's a lot more. It's not a lot more at stake, but there is a lot at stake and a lot of different moving parts to that. So I do believe that it is a healthy sport in that respect. Nothing's ever perfect, you know. There's that what the program needs and what the athletes as individuals need, and trying to match those up so long as people listen to the athletes. But yeah, I think there's never been a case, I'd say, that I've been aware of where we faced any of those pressures. If someone unfortunately hasn't quite made the weight, they're going to miss the competition, and that's going to happen at all levels. But supporting them through that, what's happening, how it's going, is something that's like monitored day to day, week to week.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Boxing is such a fascinating sport because of all those reasons, and so much goes into it beyond just the training camps alone. Again, I'm talking about the professional bit, but for the Olympic cycle, like it's so much prep that goes into that prior to actually going and actually competing. So yeah, no, it's interesting. It's interesting. So like for you then, so you've got a number of different jobs. Like how do you decide what you want to work in? Like, well, what is your ideal week or life, I guess?
Yeah, it's a difficult one because I'd quite like it when it's really busy, but you have to have enough commitment to different aspects of it. So, for example, with the sports I work with, there is a significant element of being on call, and I think I'm trying to move that towards that role, because being responsive sometimes when they've got really good physios on the ground, sometimes the role of remote medicine has come into play quite a bit, because sometimes you just need the question is answered on a random Tuesday morning or a Friday evening, when unless you were to sit with not as much to do in one office all week, which I guess could be could be done but wouldn't be funded by the sport, you're not going to deliver that. So I think there's a balance there between also the expectation that the doc is physically there, which I think the teams also like. So there's a balance to be struck there, but I think remote has helped to be able to answer that question. If it comes through and an athlete is meant to be training and available and suddenly they're sick in the middle of a week, you need to be able to phone them up. You don't really need or want to be able to drag them into a medical room if they're really poorly, but they know how to manage it. So there's kind of a constant presence of those issues if you're working in the sports, but then you also have to be able to deliver clinics. So I think having regularly set clinics in my week is important. Now, if I was working in the NHS in a say normal job, a non-sports med job, you'd probably be doing those clinics 3 or 4 times a week and balancing that with the admin side, whereas I just have to remember which clinic I'm at on which day and what I'm delivering. So I guess some of those are those blend, like we talked about before, where it could be musculoskeletal, it could be exercise medicine, it could be a bit of both. So that would be like a typical day. So if I'm working at Auth Team, and then if I'm working with Carter and Judge, which is on a like a half day basis, just bending towards those different populations too. I guess because the job and opportunities arise, I am looking to do some research, which will throw another sort of say a spanner, but another thing into the machinery, because I feel that's really important in this. And like we talked about the exercise medicine side before, what is it about exercise that might help some people going through conditions such as cancer? That's one question that whatever else I'm doing is burning away in my mind and is often relevant to some of the cases that I'm working with. So yeah, when I put that into the mix too, how I get the balance will be interesting, but I expect I will be leaning into my network of colleagues that do this too. And sometimes you've got to recalibrate. I think it's hard, and like we talked about before, the sports docs who say there isn't the trodden pathway, that kind of security in some aspects. It's taking things forward as best you can, but also I guess I'll have to have some conversations with myself saying, look here, if you want to do some research, what can you not do as well? And like we talked about before, that kind of healthy nature of having a bit of cut off time, I think, is important, because you can be doing all the things all the time and be the busiest person, especially in sports medicine, but at some point you're not going to be delivering your best and not having that downtime just to think. So yeah,
Yeah,
that's the balance
yeah,
I'm
no,
trying to keep it.
definitely, yeah, no, I think it is. It's really, it is important to have that piece. So, like, outside of being in the lakes and going running or doing what
Mhm.
you're doing, like, how do you switch off? Like, are you into like professional development books? Do you read normal? What do you do?
Oh, I'm a bugger for not reading lots of those books. I kind of look at them and I think, oh well, I could be developing something else while I'm reading that book. So I have read a few. I do love reading. I discovered a new book by an author called Rebecca Solnit, who's almost like philosophy light, and it's kind of, so it is somewhere between how you view the world and what the world is doing. And I discovered a new one of her books, Getting the Train Back from London, the other day, and honestly it's kind of like a kid in a sweet shop mentality, just to be able to move into that world. So yeah, that kind of the arts, theatre, and reading. If I had another day in the week, or if maybe I made one, I would actually do some writing. But that's a yeah,
What would
that's
you write?
I don't know, but I think right back when I did medicine, I was caught between doing medicine and English literature. So yeah, I think sometimes you don't quite know, but it would be interesting. And I do actually drop anything. If someone says, could you write an article? And often it's a journalist who just needs like a couple of lines, but they want you to write quite a bit of copy so they can get that couple of lines. I find it hard not to drop everything that I'm doing just to get in there and write it too. So yeah, that would be part of it. But yeah, I think it's important to explore different aspects, because even though I do medicine and I run as well, and different aspects, and you've got to spend time. You've got to spend time with your friends. You got to. That's one thing that I think medicine, when you're a resident doctor in the hospitals, teaches you. Don't miss out on those like life events and those relationships too. But yeah, I think trying to find new things that I'm not great or adept at doing is not hard to do, and I probably need to do it a little bit more.
Well, just yeah, I'm not. Do you need to do it? It's like if you love writing, that is really interesting that you've done that. So I'll come back to that question. But what was your A levels then? Like, because
I
that's
did, yeah. I did English, biology, and chemistry. And the English teacher, I would sit there and to be honest, I'd have my chemistry homework and I might just have it slightly under the desk because that was kind of quite hard, whereas I was paying attention in the class. But yeah, so I kept those options quite open, I guess. Yeah.
that's really interesting. So what was the book? What did you read?
What did we do? I think we did The Tempest. That was one of the books, and I think Othello as well. It's a while ago. So yeah, and
Yeah,
probably
no, it's
some Jane
interesting.
Austen. She's usually in the mix.
It's good, but I would probably I wouldn't say I was into that stuff, but I remember reading like we did Macbeth at GCSE and Animal Farm, and I loved doing that stuff. I never really thought I wasn't really into reading then, but I found that such an interesting process. And it's like, so what would be your ideal book if you're going to write any book? What would it be,
Oh,
or
it's
whether it's a
really,
book or blog or whatever?
yeah. I think human stories are fascinating. I do have some slight like reservations around this. There's quite a few now books about medicine and our profession, and it's jolly easy to tell those stories. But I sort of hold back because it's like they're someone else's stories. Yeah, it's fascinating. Yeah, you can kind of learn all these things, but actually, that's someone's personal story. I think some books were out like that were really important to read. The book by Adam Kay, the former doctor, who's like an hour comedian who's written the book This Is Going to Hurt. I mean, to be honest, for a lot of us who practice medicine, we were saying to our sort of friends and relations, you have to watch this because this is what we live. But that's yeah, I guess that's a style that I wouldn't be quite as interested in. I think sometimes kind of the writing I really like is combining what's going on in the world, like kind of nature or what's happening out there, with personal experiences too. But I think it's all, a lot of people say, oh, I'd love to write about it, but it is almost just the storytelling medicine in a lot of ways. When I'm writing up patients' letters, yeah, you're keeping the fact in for sure, but it's still a way of telling stories, and I think as humans that's how we connect.
Mm. I mean, there's so many things like you mentioned about other people's stories. That almost everything is that, isn't it? When you're interacting, you're always listening. If you're asking questions, you're getting people's answers, which is technically their stuff, but
Mm.
you're a part of that conversation and talking about it.
Yeah, so, and I think sometimes you hear people that do write say that sometimes they don't know where the story that they are writing is going. And I think sometimes that's quite a skill, because certainly in roles like in medicine, you're very much trying to curate what happens next. If you're finding a condition, you want what happens next to be part of the plan. And even in sports, when I run, I want to execute what I want to happen, how I want the race to unfold. You don't know on that day how you feel, but you prepare for the course that you're going to race or run on. I don't think I'd feel confident standing on the start line and thinking, oh, let's just see what happens. Unless sometimes it is good to do that, actually, not to set expectations and put yourself within a safe zone and just experiment a bit. But I think something like writing is actually, in some respects, it's a lot less safe than science, because
Yeah.
if you've got to meet certain parameters, and if I end up doing some research, that's terrifying, because it's the skill set you need to develop, and can I develop that? But you're still kind of working within parameters, where, as within the arts, we often don't know where that journey will lead. And I think that's where the arts can be very therapeutic for people too, because they can actually do something creative and they don't quite know what the outcome will be.
No, definitely, definitely. So I don't think I told you, but I'm pulling together. I've done over 200 of these chats, and I've so much great stuff of which I've written down of what you're saying, and I'm pulling it all into a publication, and I'm adding
Brilliant.
my narrative on it. But I just feel like this is your stuff there, but I think there's so much great stuff there that people can learn
Yeah.
from and understand and hear. And then you do add your own thing. And I feel like a right fraud when you're writing some of your own bit of it and like talking about whether it's balance or communication. Um, but it's you realize how much stuff you have learned in it. It's like, actually, yeah, there is something that I really can relate to that. And I agree with you. I think stories is so much more powerful than, like, you can put anything into Chat GPT, can't you? And it'll give you a good answer, or you can look at research, but then research can tell you one thing, but you can then look at something else which tells you the complete opposite thing. So the stories is what blends everything together.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, ChatGPT is fascinating. You can learn something. You can basically draw what's out there on the internet, but even for an individual, I wouldn't want to use it, you know, like individual cases. Sometimes, you know, if you want to find a specific formula or something, or ask it something daft. But you know, it's terrifying. I read yesterday, and it won't be the first or the last, but I think a journalist losing their job because this particular role could be done by AI. I kind of like to think, and again, it might be really naive, but you can't replace someone's individual voice. Like if you have an author that you really like, it's they're telling a great story and they're great at crafting it, but it's also very individual. Like I don't think you could probably even tell GPT to like write in the style of, it would make too many glitches and be too kind of obvious. So I think it's very, very frustrating for a lot of authors, but it's probably accelerates aspects. You know, for example, if I need to understand the basic structure of how to write a business case, it might be a tool that I use to say, in such a case, how would you even go about finding resources? Because that's not how my brain works. It's not how I've learned it. And yes, I need to find all the right aspects relevant to this case and make sure it all adds up. But sometimes looking at it for the structure, or a recipe, for example, you know, I'm still going to look at my Mary Berry book, but if I want to work out what type of flour is best for what kind of cake I want to make, I might use that technology to cut to the chase a little bit. But I think we've got to be careful in that cutting, that we're not cutting out a lot of the individual developments. And again, I know that in some aspects of healthcare, it's now okay, according to the regulators, to use AI in like generating a patient letter. And there might be areas where that has got less room for error in it. It might be that if you look at a transcript, you know, that's generated when you're talking, there are areas that as a subjective practitioner, I might have misheard or misinterpreted. I still feel that there are aspects that you would actually get the nuances of more, if that makes sense, if you're really listening and developing that. And of course, it's two-way. Like you can always present a sort of plan to a patient, but like we said before, it's got to have their acceptance and understanding it. So I think I still believe that human emotional intelligence that we can develop over time as well is going to be stronger. You know, there are going to be cases where it assists massively. There are going to be cases in like scanning people and what we can interpret where it really speeds things up. So I think we can't be shut off to it. But yeah, I think it's an evolving conversation, and I think it's too dismissive of that narrative and that learning to just cut to it. But yeah, it's going to be an interesting few years, I think, for sure. In
No,
healthcare.
I'm listening to a podcast this morning, actually. It was Stephen Bartlett and Simon Sinek, and it was talking about that. It's like, yeah, you can have the end product, but everyone talks about it's the journey, not the end goal, and everyone says that. But it is actually true. Is like I can write something that's amazing now with ChatGPT and probably written better than I would write it. But then it's like you've not kind of learned anything. Like I will do what you say about the business plan. I'll do it, and it's amazing. It's like this is really, it's way better than what I would write. But he's like, well, actually, is it? Because what I would have done would have been my way of doing it. And then, yes, it maybe isn't quite as polished, but you've thought, actually, yeah, maybe it's made you think. And it's like, actually, that would be good.
Yeah, and I think it's like in anything, when you've got an understanding of a process, you know, I would love to have it help me on things like statistics in research, but if I can't understand those statistics and I can't unravel them and explain them, then I'm in trouble. And also, it's not always right. It's certainly not always right. That's a definite. So I think it's learning that process. Even if we'll all have different strengths, we'll all have different areas that we work better in. But I think finding those is part of the journey.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. Brilliant. Look, Rebecca, I really appreciate your time on this. I've really enjoyed it. And I'm looking forward to seeing you at Auth Team sometime soon, or Carter and George, or any of the other places that you're working in as well.
Oh, thank you very much. It's been really good to talk. And yeah, I'm sure we'll catch up soon.
Brilliant. Thanks, Rebecca. Have a good day.
Thank you.